Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Sadi. We're talking about the prohibition against muzzling an animal while it is working, like while it's threshing in the field. So we have a braita. Tenor banan. Parot hamrakesot batvua. Vadashot bitruma ubmaaser. Eno over mishum bal tachsom. אבל מפני מראית העין מביא בול מאותו המין ותולה לה בתרסקלין שבפיה. If an animal, a cow, is treading on produce, but this is not talking about threshing, which is part of the production of the grain. From when it's harvested, you have to thresh and winnow and so on. It's not part of the processing, but rather this is after it's finished. You already did the threshing and the winnowing and piled it up, and now you want to make some kind of dish made out of like cracked wheat, in which you have to smash the wheat a little further. And so, because this is past the point of its of the processing, it's already completed. So at that point forward, you do not have to feed the animal. It's permitted to make the animal work and muzzle it. That's it, because it's already completed the processing, as we proved earlier, that you only have to allow it to eat when it's a part of the finalization of the processing. So that's the mirakesot. And also, if it is doing threshing, this is talking about regular threshing, but the grain is tiruma or maaser grain. Usually you would do the threshing first, pile it, and only then is it liable for tiruma maaser. So you take the tiruma maaser at the end, after the threshing. That's why usually while it's threshing, the animal has to be able to eat from it. But let's say, as the Gemara will clarify this in a minute, you take tiruma and maaser even before it was processed. You do it right away. As soon as you cut it off, you take tiruma and maaser. And now you're taking that tiruma and maaser to the threshing floor and the animal stepping on it. So in that case, do you have to allow it to eat? And the answer is no. Right? You can muzzle it. And actually, regarding tiruma, it's not allowed to eat tiruma. Only a kohen can eat tiruma. This would be actually problematic. So you can/have to muzzle the animal, and so and you don't violate when you do that. However, there's still a problem of marit ha'ayin, of appearances. Someone walking by will see your animal threshing grain, and he won't know that it's tiruma or maaser, or he won't know that you're just making cracked wheat and it's after the time when it was already processed, and the person will think that you're violating. Therefore, what you should do is bring a type of that species of produce, whatever, if it's barley, bring some barley, and you put it in a basket that looks like this. It's a feeding bag that you put over the animal's mouth so that it will be able to eat while it's working. And that way, anyone passing by will see, oh yeah, he's letting it eat, and it's eating from a feeding bag. Then maybe they will understand that the produce itself is something that you're not allowed to feed it. And so then also it's helpful to the animal that it won't be sad that it's seeing all this grain and is muzzled, so it'll have something to eat. And it's the same type, so then when it looks at us, says, oh, this barley is delicious, so you put it also some barley in the bag, and that way everything will be okay to any onlookers, and there won't be any problem, because it really cannot eat the teruma and maaser. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, מביא קרשינים ותולה לה שהקרשינים יפות לה מן הכל. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that you should bring vetch, a type of vegetable that's generally used for fodder. Here's the vetch plant. This is what it looks like. And you put that in the bag, the feeding bag, because it's really good for it. It's better than eating wheat or barley. It's very healthy for the animal. So the point is you have to feed it. You don't have to necessarily feed it the same item that it's stepping on, as long as you feed it something that is healthy for it. Good. So we established this law. Now we have a problem because there's a contradictory baraita. Urminhi parot hamirakesot bitzbu'a eno over mishum bal tachsom. Okay, the first law is the same as the first baraita. If it's treading on produce after it's already been processed, then you can tread on it more to make cracked wheat or whatever you want to just break it apart more, and that's not a problem. You can muzzle it. Okay, that we know already. V'hadashot b'truma maaser ober mishum bal tachsom. And if it's threshing, regular threshing on teruma or maaser produce, then it's a problem. You will violate if you muzzle it. You have to let it eat. This is a big problem. First of all, I thought teruma, you're not allowed to let the animal eat. What's the story with maaser? This contradicts the previous baraita. So this is the main question that we're going to have to solve. We're going to have a few answers. And lastly, in the Braita, "Vanochri hadash beparato shel Yisrael eno over mishum bar tachsom." V'yisrael hadash beparato shel nochri over mishum bar tachsom. If a non-Jew is using an animal that's owned by a Jew to thresh, let's say he's threshing his own field, and he borrowed an animal owned by a Jew, and he muzzles it, then the Jew does not violate bar tachsom. He's not doing it. The non-Jew is doing it for his own sake. Whereas the opposite, if a Jew borrows an animal of a non-Jew and muzzles it, he does violate. So the point is, it doesn't matter who owns the animal. The problem is who is using the animal. And so, if a Jew is using the animal and muzzles it, he violates. Whereas if a non-Jew is using the animal, even if it belongs to a Jew, he does not violate. The Jew does not violate. Okay. Kashya teruma, kashya maaser umaaser. We're going to come back to the non-Jew case in a few minutes. But right now we have the challenge of a contradiction regarding teruma and a contradiction regarding maaser. The first baraita says that it's okay to muzzle it. Maybe you even have to. And the second one says, do not muzzle it, let it eat. Okay, answer number one. Bishlama teruma la kashya. Kan bitruma, kan begidule teruma. All right, we have half an answer. For teruma, we can say, if you're talking about actual teruma, I had produce, I separated teruma. Now this teruma, I'm going to give to a kohen, or I gave it to a kohen, and it's being threshed. So in this case, the animal is not allowed to eat it. In any case, usually it already be also finished processing. Okay, but the point is that the animal can't eat it, and therefore you should muzzle the animal so that it will not eat the teruma. That is that's the first baraita. Whereas the second baraita that says let it eat, that's talking about something that grows from teruma. I take a teruma produce and I put it in the ground, and it grows a new plant. That new plant, mideoraita, is not teruma. Midirabanan, we treat it as teruma. But since on a deoraita level, it's just regular produce, therefore the animal would be allowed to eat it, and in fact, I cannot stop it on teruma, on a deoraita. See, the rabbis can be machmir and say, listen, treat this like teruma, give it to a kohen midirabanan. But the rabbis don't have the power to uproot a Torah law, a law ta'aseh, and then also muzzle it. So no, you cannot muzzle it in that case. All right, so that solves the problem for teruma. But we have a problem for maaser. El maaser kashya. V'chitema maaser nami la kashya kan b'maaser kan b'gidule maaser. And maybe you'll say, let's use the same answer we just did for teruma and apply it to maaser. That when we say that you can muzzle it, that's talking about when you're threshing on maaser, because you're not allowed to eat it. Whereas when it says that you have to let the animal eat it, that's talking about maaser, that you put into the ground and grew a new plant. And so this is not maaser mideoraita, and therefore on the deoraita level you have to. It's nothing. It's chulin, and you have to let the animal eat it. So let's use the same answer for this. No, we can't do that. Bishlama gidule teruma, ela gidule maaser chulinin huditnan, gidule tebel, v'gidule maaser sheni chulin. That answer only works for teruma, because there, something that grows from teruma is considered teruma midrabanan. So therefore, it makes sense to call it teruma and say, oh, nevertheless, it's only midrabanan, so therefore, have to let the animal eat it. But something that grows from maaser is not maaser at all, not even midrabanan. It's simply chulin, as we learned in the Mishnah in Terumot. Something that grows from tebel, or tebel that was you didn't take any teruma maaser yet, or something that grows from maaser sheni. You already separated the maaser sheni, and then you put it in the ground and something grows from it. In both of those cases, it's chulin, and therefore the baraita would not call it maaser, and there would not even be a chidush to say that there's anything special about it. So that we cannot use the same answer as we did for teruma, and use the same answer for maaser. Ela la kashya, ha b'maaser rishon, ha b'maaser sheni. Okay, so first answer for maaser is, as the difference between maaser rishon, that goes to a levi, but it's only owned by the levi. In other words, have a monetary responsibility to give it to a levi, but it doesn't have inherent kedusha. Anybody can, if a levi wants to share it or give it back, anybody can eat it, and so therefore an animal can eat it. So if we're talking about maaser rishon, then, and the animal's threshing on it, you have to let the animal eat it. That's that b'raita. Whereas if you're talking about maaser sheni, that's maaser that the farmer keeps and brings it to Yerushalayim and has to eat it in Yerushalayim. There are restrictions on that eating. And according to one opinion, it is actually holy. It belongs to Hashem, and Hashem says, I give you permission to eat it. And therefore, one cannot let the animal eat maaser sheni, and so the braita that says, muzzle it, that you are allowed to muzzle it, is talking about maaser sheni. V'iba'etema, ha v'ha be'maaser sheni, v'lakashya, ha Rabbi Meir, ha Rabbi Yehuda. Harbi me'edamar maser rishon maser mamon gavoahu. Harbi Yehuda damar maser sheni mamon hejothu. Or a second answer, that both Baraitot are talking about Maaser Sheni, and there's no problem. One of them is a Bimeir, one of them is a Yehuda. One of them is a Bimeir who says that Maaser Sheni belongs to Hashem. It's holy, and therefore the owner has to take it to Yerushalayim, and Hashem says, listen, I will share my produce with you, and you can eat it as long as you do it in Yerushalayim, and you share it together with lots of people, and you make a nice celebration out of it. That's fine. But you cannot give it to an animal because it's holy. That's the first baraita that says, muzzle it. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda thinks that Maaser Sheni belongs to the owner. Hashem says, listen, it's your produce, you grew it, it belongs to you. There's only a restriction that you have to eat in Yerushalayim. But as long as it's in Yerushalayim, you can give it to the animal. And therefore, that would be the opinion. The second b'raita would be the Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that you cannot muzzle it. When it's maaser, it's talking about maaser sheni. Okay, so that's the second way. Now we just ask in general, which we already clarified. Hechidame kegon hekdimu bashibolin. How can you have a case where you're threshing something that's already teruma or maaser? Usually you thresh it, pile it up, smooth it out, and only then you're liable to take teruma maaser. So usually you do take teruma maaser afterwards. So what kind of case are we talking about? You'd be threshing teruma and maaser, and the answer is, maybe you proceeded. You usually do it after, but let's say you did it before. You cut it down, and then you took teruma and maaser already while it was on the stalks, before you separated it out and turned it into the grain and all that. So it still has the status of teruma maaser, even though you did it earlier than usual. Okay. Hold on. According to the Rabbi Yehuda, even if you say it belongs to the farmer, and therefore let the animal eat it, but doesn't it have to be inside the city wall of Jerusalem? And so, how could the animal eat it? And he says, yes. So talking about a case where he is threshing inside the wall of Bet Pageh. Bet Pageh is a suburb of Yerushalayim, which was incorporated into Yerushalayim. And in the main city of Yerushalayim, it's not going to be a lot of room to have threshing floors. You need a lot of space. But in Bet Pageh, which technically legally is part of Yerushalayim, and there are threshing floors there, so only in that case would the animal be allowed to eat it there. Another answer, la kashya, kan b'ma'asar vadai, kan b'ma'asar demai. We can say that if it's definite ma'aser, then that's a problem. An animal cannot eat definite maaser, and in that case, that's the first b'raita that says muzzle it. But if it's maaser from demai, I had demai, I bought something from Ha'aretz, which he probably took teruma and maaser. We assume he took teruma. He probably took maaser. From a deoraita level, I can assume he did, and I could just eat it. The rabbis say, listen, be machmir, maybe he didn't do it. Not all of them are so careful. So take teruma. But since this maaser is only maaser midirabanan, on the deoraita level, it's chulin. since it's chulin on the doraita level, I can't violate the law of muzzling the ox. So, in that case, I have to let the ox eat it. That's the second braita. Now, hashtedati lachi teruma nami lakashya kan betrumat vadai kan betrumat demai. Once you have suggest this answer for maaser, so then let's apply it back to teruma as well and say the same thing. When the Baraita says you can muzzle it, that's talking about definite teruma. Whereas the Baraita says you have to let it eat, that's talking about teruma, that's demai. The Ama'aretz already took teruma. Now I'm taking teruma just in case midrabanan. That's that teruma that I separate really on the Doraita level is chulin. So therefore I have to let the animal eat it. One, I use the same answer. And the answer, response to that is Bishlama Maaser Demai, Ika, Ela Terumat Demai, Mi Ika. Okay, it makes sense to talk about Maaser Demai. There is such a thing, but there is no such thing as taking Teruma Demai. You don't have to take Teruma from Demai, from produce that you take from Ama'aretz, because we can assume that the Ama'aretz took Teruma. They're careful in that. Teruma, if you eat teruma, it's chayav karet. So even Ama'aretz, they were scared of karet. They would take, and it's also only a little bit, and so they would take teruma, they would separate teruma. But they were not always so careful regarding maaser. How do we know this? So Hatanya, hu bitel et havidui vegazar al hademai. Lefi sheshala b'chol gebul Yisrael v'ra'a shelo hayu mafrishin ela teruma gedola bilvad. The Braita that reports that Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he abolished saying the declaration regarding vidui. This is said in Devarim, where you say on the 3rd and 6th year, I got rid of all the teruma, I took it all out of my house if I've been storing it up and didn't yet give it to the Levi, or give it to, or to eat it in Yerushalayim, or give it to the Ani. I took care of everything, and so he stopped. Usually, the farmer has to say this to make sure that he really took care of all of his maaser obligations. But Yochanan Kohen Gadol saw that the people aren't doing things precisely, and therefore they could not say this vidui anymore. Okay, that's besides the point. And he also made a gezerah regarding demai. This is the source that you have to take teruma and have to take maaser from demai, because he went and did a survey and all of the boundaries of Israel, and he saw that many of the people were only separating teruma gedolah. Teruma gedolah is the first teruma that you take, suggested 2%, and give it to the kohen. So you see, they were taking teruma, they just were not taking maaser, and therefore, if you buy from an Ama'aretz, there's no need to take teruma. So there's no such thing as terumat vadai, terumat demai. And that's why we cannot use that as an answer for teruma, but we can use it as an answer for maaser. However, there is a different type of teruma, and we can apply it to that case. Ela la kashya kan bitrumat maasar vadai kan bitrumat maasar demai. This is talking about terumat maaser. That is when the farmer gives 10% to the Levi. The Levi has to take 10% of the 10% that he got, meaning 1% of the total, and give that to a kohen. So the farmers, the Me'aretz, they were careful about teruma gedolah, because that they take directly. But since they weren't taking teruma to taking maaser, they also did not take terumat maaser. And therefore, we can say that we can resolve the contradiction between the two braitot regarding teruma by assuming it's talking about terumat maaser. So the braita, the first one that says that you may muzzle it, is talking about terumat maaser for sure, that you know is terumat maaser. The animal cannot eat that, and therefore you can muzzle it. Whereas if it's terumat maaser from demai on the doraita level, that's chulin, and therefore you have to let the animal eat it. All right, next. Be'omine merav sheshat haita ochelet umatrezet mahu. Let's say animal, it's eating wheat. And if while it's eating wheat, it has diarrhea, meaning if the wheat is not agreeing with it, it's not, it's sick, and the more wheat it eats, worse, it's bad for its health. What about in that case? Can we muzzle it so that so it won't have more stomach aches? Mishum de ma'alelahu veha la ma'alela, or dima de chazia mista'ara veha chazia umista'ara. Here's the two sides of the question. maybe the main reason for the law that you have to let the animal eat while it's working is because it's good for it. And in this case, well, obviously it's not good for it. It has a stomach ache, and so it's not regulating itself. Humans, usually, if you have a stomach ache, you're not going to eat it, but the animal doesn't know. And so it's going to continue eating the wheat even though it's giving it diarrhea. And so therefore the whole point is for its health. Therefore you can muzzle it if it's not healthy for it. So that would be for its objective health. Or do we say it's about its subjective feelings, that when the animal sees the wheat on the floor and then it makes it want to eat it, and it will cause it mental suffering if you cannot eat it. And therefore, even though it's giving it a stomach ache, giving it diarrhea, nevertheless, it's going to mentally suffer if it cannot eat. So therefore, you have to let it eat, even though it has a stomach ache. That's the two sides of the question. Let's see the answer. Amar lehu Rav Sheshat, Tini tuha, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Omer, Mebi karshinim v'toleh la, shekashim yafot la min hakol, shema mina mishum dama'aleh lahu, shema mina. We can learn it from the opinion of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai in that baraita that we started with, who says, even though it's stepping on, let's say, wheat, and it's wheat of terumah, and so you can muzzle it, but because of marit ayin, you should put a feed bag on it. In the feed bag, you don't have to put wheat. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said, put vetch, because vetch is healthy for it. What do you see from here? That the main thing is to provide for the animal's health. Even though even in that case, it might be seeing wheat and saying, oh, I really want that wheat. But as long as you give it vetch, it's okay. In that case, it's really only for marit ayin anyway. So, according to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, we do see that the main thing is for the animal's health, and therefore, if it has a stomach ache, you would be allowed to muzzle it, even though maybe mentally it will say, that really looks good, but you know better than it to keep it healthy. Next question. Mahu sheyomar adam lenochri chasom parati vedush ba. Mi amrinan ki amrinan amira lenochri shevut hanemila linyan Shabbat deisur tekila aval hasima deisur lav la or dilma lashena. Are you allowed, a Jew who owns an animal, is he allowed to ask a non-Jew to muzzle my cow and thresh with it? He wants to do amida legoy. A Jew's not going to do it himself, but the non-Jew will do it on his behalf. Is that permitted? Here's the two sides of the question. Do we say that asking a non-Jew to do something for you is called shivut? And shivut means it's a lower level melacha on Shabbat. You wouldn't be chayav sikila for it. But you're still not allowed. Generally, it's considered a derabanan. So that's true only for Shabbat, because Shabbat is very stringent. If I would violate Shabbat myself, I would get the punishment of stoning, and therefore I am also not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do it. And that only applies on Shabbat because it's so stringent. But regarding muzzling an animal, which is only a lav, it's only a regular prohibition, it would only get lashes. So then, since it's a lower level prohibition, I am allowed to ask the non-Jew to do it on my behalf. Listen, I can't muzzle it and work it, but you can. Could you do me a favor and muzzle it and work and thresh my grain? So that, according to that, it would be allowed. Or do we say, no, there's no difference and it's prohibited? In either case, you're never allowed to ask a non-Jew to do something that you are not allowed to do yourself. All right, let's see an answer. Tashema. Nochri hadash beparato shel Yisrael eno ober mishum bar tachsom mi'avar hu de la'avar ha'isura ika. So here, look at this baraita. It's the baraita that we started with, the staff with. And there it says, a non-Jew who threshes with the cow of a Jew does not violate muzzling an ox. So we see here that although you'd say the Jew does not violate by giving it to him, you're not going to give him lashes, but still it's prohibited. All right, just because no lashes. On Shabbat also, you don't get sikila for asking a non-Jew to do something for you, but it's still prohibited as a shivut. So according to this, since the Braita says, I know oved alive, you won't get punished for it, but it is prohibited. So we can derive from this Braita that is prohibited. And we answer, no, this is not a sufficient proof. It could be that there's not even a prohibition. And the reason why it says eno over that you don't get punished, you don't violate, is only for poetic parallelism, because the sefa of that Braita, which also we already saw above, is that if a Jew threshes and muzzles and threshes with the cow of a non-Jew, then the Jew does violate and would get punished, because it's the one who does it, not the one who owns it. So since in the Sefer I wanted to say that the Jew does violate in that case, so for parallelism it says in the first one he does not violate. But the truth is that not only does he not violate, but it actually could be permitted. Now, so therefore it's ambiguous. We don't know if eno over means that it's totally permitted, or that there's no punishment, but it's prohibited. And therefore we cannot prove either way from this Baraita. Let's try again. Ta shema de shalchu le avud Shmuel halen tore de ganbin armai umenagechin yaton mahu shalach lehu harama it abid behu arimu alaihu veizdebun. Some people asked a question to the father of Shmuel. This is regarding the prohibition in the Torah to castrate an animal. It says right here in Vayikra 22:24, lo takribu ladonai. One is not allowed to offer such an animal to Hashem. Ube'artzechem lo ta'asu. And you cannot do this in your land, meaning that you're not allowed to castrate an animal. This was a common practice, because if you have a bull is a regular whole animal, and it's very difficult to handle. It's very wild. And so this was normal practice to castrate it, and then it's called an ox. A bull and an ox are the same animal, just one is castrated. And once that is done, then it has less testosterone and is less wild and is easier to work in the field. So it was almost necessary to do this in order to have an ox that can work in the field. The problem is that there's a biblical prohibition against doing it. Here is what sometimes some of the Jews would do. These bulls that Gentiles would steal and castrate them. But this was a trick. It was an artifice. The Jews knew this, and the Jews wanted this to be done, and so they would hint to the non-Jew, it really would be helpful. So the non-Jew would come in the night, steal it, do the surgery, put it back, and then the Jew could say, oh, well, it was stolen, and the non-Jew did it. The thief did it. What can I do? So the father of Shemuel responded regarding those people. Says, since they use an artifice in order to circumvent the law, therefore we're going to use an artifice against them, and as punishment, we're going to force them to sell the animal. They cannot make use of the animal. So he said it's not allowed. Even though the Jew's not doing it, the non-Jew is doing it for him. Okay, so that's the law regarding this prohibition against castration, and we're making a parallel. The same would be true regarding muzzling an animal. Same thing. A Jew owns the animal. He cannot ask a non-Jew to muzzle the animal and thresh for him. So according to this, it is prohibited, and there is even a punishment against it. Amar Papa, bene ma'arava sabri la kerbi chidka, de'amar bene Noach mesuvin al haserus, veka'abre mishum v'lifnei iver lo titen michshol. Papa rejects this proof. He says you cannot compare the prohibition of castration to the prohibition of muzzling. Why? Because according to the scholars in Israel, they follow the opinion of Rabbi Chidka, who says that Bnei Noach, non-Jews, are commanded regarding castration. Those non-Jews are not allowed to do this either. It's part of Sheva Mitzvot Bnei Noach. Maybe it's connected to Eved Min HaChai. And therefore, if a Jew would ask a non-Jew to do it for him, even if an artifice comes steal it in the middle of the night, then the Jew is violating, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. If I set up someone, even if I don't do a sin myself, but I encourage that person to do a sin, have them do it for me, Jew or non-Jew, something that they're not allowed to do, then I would violate lifnei iver. And therefore, it could be that the problem here, why the father of Shemuel said, oh, this is bad, and you get a punishment, is because you violated lifnei iver. However, this is not transferable to the case of muzzling. For a muzzling, a non-Jew is permitted to muzzle an animal and thresh with it. And so, there's no lifnei iver in having him do it. And therefore, you cannot learn from this to the case of muzzling, and therefore we do not have an answer about whether it is the same as Shabbat and not allowed, or whether it is permitted. Okay, on the topic of this castrating an animal, when it says that we, midah keneged midah, will do something against him and force him to sell the animal so that he cannot benefit from the fact that he had it castrated by a non-Jew. So Rava says when he has to sell it, you have to sell it at a lower price, sell it for slaughter. Selling it for slaughter is just the value of the meat, which is much less than selling it for work. And so that way, it's a serious punishment because you're going to lose out significant money. The point is that he should not benefit from castrating it and making it more able to work. For the meat, it's not going to make a difference, and so he's going to lose out money, and that will be a good deterrent. Amar lo Abaye, dayan shekanasta alehen mechira. Abaye says not necessary. It's a sufficient deterrent that you're making him sell it at all, and it's okay to sell it to sell it to someone else. See, someone else is allowed to use it. And let's say an animal was already castrated by someone that wasn't yours, and then you buy it. If you buy it that way, then a Jew is allowed to use it. You're allowed to work an animal, work an ox. But you cannot have it done, and therefore it's sufficient that you castrate it or cause a non-Jew to castrate it on your behalf. Therefore, sell it, even if at market price as a work animal. That's sufficient of a punishment. Now, peshita beno gadol ki acher dameh. Now, when you have this punishment and you have to sell it to someone, you can sell it to another Jew, right? Because the other Jew is allowed to use it because he didn't do it. He was not involved in castrating it. So everybody would agree that a person can sell it to his adult son because his adult son is another individual and is financially independent. Beno katan mai, but let's say you have a farmer. He had a bull. He had a non-Jew castrated for him. And now, the penalty, he has to give it away. He has to sell it. Can he sell it to his minor son? The problem here is that he still controls it, even though it's in a custodial account for his son. Rav Achai Asar, Rav Asher Share. So it's machlok. Rav Achai said you're not allowed. Rav Asher said it's permitted. It's still in a different ownership, even though the original farmer still controls it. Meremar umor zutra v'amri la hanhu tere chaside mechalefe ahadade. Meremar umor zutra. And others say they are two unnamed chasidim, but they are chasidim or pious men. They would simply exchange oxen with each other. One of them had an ox that he was castrated by a non-Jew. The other one also owned an ox that was castrated by a non-Jew. They're not allowed to use it. As a penalty, they have to give it to someone else. But instead of selling it, they would switch it with one another, and then they could use these oxen in their farms. Okay, so the question here is that it sounds like here that they did it regularly, right? That they would do this. Mechalefe. So the Rishonim say, no, it just happened one time. The workers did it. They didn't realize it, but really, the Hasidim, they wouldn't do this. But it seems from just the historical context that this was a necessary thing to do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to be a farmer. I mean, you can use female cows to pull things only, but then females you'd also need for milk. So now you have only all these males. Bulls? What are you going to do with them? And so perhaps this was a more regular practice that was recognized as necessary. And yes, you'd have a non-Jew do it, and you'd also have a penalty that you have to sell it to someone else or exchange it with someone else. But this was a loophole to make life practical, even though the Torah prohibits this. Ba'e Rami bar Hama. Hoshib la kotz befiha mahu. Rami bar Chama was known for asking these very technical, maybe theoretical questions to test the nature of a law. So Rami bar Chama says, let's say you don't muzzle the animal, but you stick a thorn in its mouth, such that it would be painful for it to eat. And therefore, it's not going to eat. So I didn't muzzle it, I just put a thorn in its mouth. What about that? Is that permitted or not? The Gemara interjects, Hoshibla hasima me'aliyatahi. What do you mean? You put a thorn in its mouth? That's the same as muzzling. Of course that's not allowed. Ela yashab lakos befiha mahu. Rather, let's say a thorn got into its mouth. By itself, it was eating, and it got a thorn in its mouth. And the owner says, oh, look, there's a thorn in its mouth. I'm just not going to take it out. Can I be passive? I didn't muzzle it. I didn't do anything actively. But now it's in a state that it will be painful for it to eat. Can I just leave it there? That's question one. Can the farmer take a lion and have it set it up to crouch nearby so that the cow will be scared and be constantly looking at the lion? I assume that it's behind a bar or something so that it doesn't come and actually eat the ox. But he put the lion there to distract the animal so that it will not eat grain. Is that permitted? And we ask, you purposely put the animal and crouched it there so that it won't eat? That would be directly the same as actually muzzling it. For sure that would not be allowed. Right, we're talking about a case where a lion came over by itself and crouched there, and the farmer just didn't shoo it away. Would that be permitted, even though the animal is not going to eat? Next question. You take the offspring of the animal that's threshing, and you put it outside, and it's making noises, and the parent is looking at the offspring and thinking about it and is distracted and not eating. In that case, you actually put it there because it's more of an indirect distraction. Is that permitted? Let's say the animal is very thirsty. It's so thirsty that it cannot eat. And the owner just doesn't give it to drink. And that way it won't be eating, but it's only indirect. Or parasla katabliya al gabe disha mahu. Or let's say he puts a leather blanket over the produce so that the animal doesn't see it and cannot access it. He can still step on it because he's stepping on it over the leather blanket. But he cannot eat it. Is that a problem or not? On the one hand, see, when you muzzle its mouth, it sees the food and it wants it. And now you're muzzling its mouth, so maybe is that considered cruel? But if it's covered over totally, even though it cannot eat it, maybe that's permitted. Okay, so those were all the questions of Rami Bar Chama. We don't have answers to most of them except for one. Peshot miha hada. Let's answer the last one. The Tanya. רשאי בעל פרה להרעיב פרתו כדי שתאכל מן הדישה הרבה, ורשאי בעל הבית להתיר פקיע עמיר לפני הבהמה כדי שלא תאכל מן הדישה הרבה. The owner of the cow is allowed, he's lending out his cow to someone else to use to thresh with it. The owner of the cow is permitted to starve his cow before he rents it out so that it will eat a lot while it's threshing. Right? The owner of the cow doesn't care how much it eats, and so why should the owner of the cow waste money feeding the animal when it's going to go and he knows that the worker, the borrower, has to let it eat, so it'll eat while it's threshing. That's permitted. But so too, an owner of a cow who's using his own cow is permitted to untie a bundle of straw before the animal so that it will eat the straw, which is cheap, and will not eat the wheat that is threshing a lot. So we're assuming here that he's taking the straw and he's spreading it over the produce, and it says that is permitted, and therefore, just like that's permitted, the same thing would be true for the leather blanket. You can put over the wheat, and so that it will not eat it. So it seems from here that it's permitted. Is that a good proof? The answer is no. That's different because it's eating the hay. Okay, you're giving it alternate food that's cheaper. That's fine as long as it's eating something. I mean, technically, it could, dig under the hay and eat the threshing, eat what is threshing. So that's permitted because it is still eating something, and that's not a proof for the leather blanket where it cannot eat anything at all. Or there's another version of that braita that says that the owner of the cow is permitted to untie a bundle of straw before it starts working. In other words, he's allowed to make the animal full before it starts working. So then, once it's threshing, it won't be hungry and it won't eat a lot. This version of the Braita makes sense because it's the flip side of the Resha. The Resha says that the owner of a cow can starve it and then give it over so it'll eat a lot. And the opposite is also true, that the person that if the person's using his own cow, he can make it full with hay and then have it work so that it will not eat a lot. Be'amine Rabbi Yonatan Rabbi Simai Hasama bibachutz mahu shor bedisho amar Rachamana v'ha'alav bedishohu o dirma lo tadush b'chasima amar Rachamana. Rabbi Yonatan asked Rabbi Simai, are you allowed to muzzle an ox outside the threshing floor beforehand? Just muzzle it, and only then bring it on the threshing floor and then have it work. Here's the two sides. The pasuk says, "Shor lo tachsom shor b'disha." Do not muzzle an ox while it's threshing, and so that means you're just not allowed to muzzle it while it's threshing on the threshing floor. And he did not do that. He muzzled it before it started working, and therefore it's permitted. Or do we say, or does the pasuk mean, do not thresh while it's muzzled? So it doesn't matter if you put it on an hour before, a day before, you're not allowed to work it while it is muzzled. Amar lo, Bibet abicha talamed. Rabbi Simai tells Rabbi Yonatan, we can learn this from your father's house. He was a Kohen, so we can learn this from the laws of Kohanim. Yain v'shechar al tesh atau banecha itach beboachem. Beboachem hu de'asur hamishta ume'al shareh. The pasuk says that you're not allowed to have wine and strong drink, you and your children are the Kohanim, when you come into Ohel Moed. You're not allowed to enter Ohel Moed or the Bet HaMikdash while drinking. So should we interpret that to mean that only you're not allowed to enter it while you're drinking? If you actually have a drink in your hand and you're drinking it as you enter, that's what's not allowed. But let's say you drank before and you're drunk, but now you're currently not drinking, then you would be allowed to, right? You're not allowed to drink and drive. Does that only mean you can't actually be drinking and driving at the same time? What if I'm totally drunk before and then I drive, but while I'm driving, I'm not drunk? Would that be permitted? Obviously not. The Torah says they have to be able to, this is the pasuk right after the one before, you have to be able to distinguish between sacred and non-sacred, which means you have to be sober to have all your wits with you. And so you not only can you not drink in the Ohel Moed, you cannot be drunk in the Ohel Moed. So, ela ma'hatam b'shat bi'ah lo tehe shichrut, hachaname b'shat isha lo tehe chasima. Since in that law, it means that when you are coming into the Ohel Moed, you cannot be drunk, even if you drank before. So too, at the time of threshing, the animal cannot be muzzled, even if he muzzled it before he brought the animal onto the threshing floor. And lastly, Tanur Banan, hachosem et hapara v'hamezaveg b'kilayim patur ve'eno lo ke'ela dash umanhig bilvad. Someone who muzzles a cow but doesn't work it, right? He just muzzles it. Or if he attaches two animals together of different kinds, and he yokes them together, they're also patur. He's allowed to do that. He would only he would not get punished if he did that. One only gets punished if, while it's muzzled, he also makes a thresh. Or while two different types of species of animals are yoked together, he also pulls them, has them walk and pull something and work together. Only then. So you see, actually, this complements what we just said. It's the opposite. Not only is it not permitted to muzzle it before and then work it. Opposite. If you muzzle it just not when it's working, you can muzzle an animal not when it's working. That's okay. You just can't work it while it's muzzled. And same thing with kilayim. The prohibition is working it while they are together, not having them yoked together. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.